All right, so hello everybody, and thank you all so much for coming. I think today is a very propitious day, the issues you've had with Mercury retrograde notwithstanding, because we have Mercury conjunct Uranus, conjunct Eris. It's exactly trining Saturn today, and it's also trining the North Node. So we've got a beautiful grand trine. And it's a perfect day to take a look at Mercury, at Hermes, to really see what he is all about, from maybe a little deeper perspective. And I'm going to kind of do a little role play and make believe that I am Eris and hand him a golden apple, and I'm going to ask him, who are you really? So that'll kind of give you a lead in for what we're going to talk about today. Because as astrologers, we tend to talk about Mercury most often about how we think and how we communicate, and referencing our cognitive skills and intellect and the quality and tone of our voice and so on. But Mercury is often reduced in status and hierarchy because of his quote, his weight. But there is tremendous density and latitude in this celestial traveler, in this planet. There's much hidden in the core expression of his this primary, very personal archetype. In fact, his cleverness has already convinced us that what we see is what we get, and we've kind of bought into that to some degree. So today, what I want to do is I want to examine Mercury from the angle of perspective of both the mythology, the astrology, and the astronomy, because I think that builds a story that really helps us understand how this planet is working in the charts. So, for starters, his proximity to the sun is no accident. The sun is the source of all life force, and it's not coincidental that he is the messenger, the traveler, the guide. We know him as the trader, the orator, the magician, and the mystic. But he was also known as the trickster and the thief and the liar, and he was also a rapist. And he was not just the messenger, he was the messenger of the gods. And we know him also as the Psychopomp, the guide of souls between worlds. And we know him as the Sibling, a family member. He was somebody's brother, just like many of us. So most significantly, he performs a critical evolutionary role for each of us as he guides us across the boundaries between our own light and shadow, and the conscious and the subconscious within us, so that we can perform an alchemical synthesis of self that we call personal evolution. When we explore Mercury from these perspectives, these meanings will emerge, and we're gonna go through them. Unfortunately, there is no single mythological thread that connects the various faces and personalities of Mercury, or Hermes, as he was known to the Greeks. In one form or another, the mythology of Mercury extends back to the earliest oral and written traditions and spans multiple cultures. We know him primarily from the mythos of Greece and Rome, who were influenced by the earlier Sumerian, Babylonian, and Egyptian cultures. To the Egyptians, he was Thoth. To the Romans, he was Mercury. To the Celts, he was Lugh. And to the Norse, he was Loki. So the mythos surrounding Hermes spans 8 centuries. In the Hellenistic period, which extended through the last 3 centuries before the Common Era, Hermes the magician, osmosis with Thoth, becoming Hermes Trismegistus, the alchemist. So to begin with, we know him as the god of animal husbandry, including cattle herding, shepherding, goat herding, and the breeding of horses and mules. And in the earliest accounts, he was Hermes of Arcadia. He was a simple shepherd who tended the flock and lived peacefully on the side of Mount Kylene. And in this role, he's portrayed more as a feminine, more than a masculine archetype, nurturing and living close to the land. But the story of Hermes' evolution also takes a different storyline. His exploits in the Iliad and the Odyssey reveal his more masculine persona, as the patriarchy of the Greeks and the Romans conditioned his mythology, becoming a murderer and also a rapist of 2 different princesses, having no remorse for her death of one of them as a result of his behavior. And this was a reflection of the fragmented and patriarchal perspectives of the diminishing role of women in Greek and Roman society. The mythology that has come down to us from Greece is primarily through the writings of the Greek poets Hesiod and Homer around 800 BCE, who tell the stories of Hermes' cleverness as a child, his knowledge of music, astronomy, astrology, healing, and magic. And the best known story tells the story of his theft of the cattle that belonged to his half-brother Apollo. The story is told that only one day after his birth, Hermes was bored with being in his crib, so he turned himself into a puff of smoke and slipped through the keyhole to find his adventure. Once outside, he turned back into his normal baby form, and he went off on his travels. And he soon came upon his brother's cattle and decided that he needed to have some of them for his own. He had the herd walk backwards, most of you know this story, to obscure the direction they had gone, and fashioned magical sandals for himself that erased his own tracks. Continuing on his way, he came upon a tortoise. The tortoise's lustrous shell had totally captivated him. And so he cleverly persuaded the tortoise to let him have a closer look, upon which he cracked open the shell, ate the tortoise meat, and using some of the sinews from the cows he had just stolen, he created a lyre, a musical instrument. And then he turned around and he returned home back into his cradle like nothing had happened. So Apollo, who had the skill of divination, realized what had happened, that his newborn brother was responsible for the theft. And Hermes argued, he's a baby in swaddling clothing. How could he have conceived such a devious act? But unsatisfied, Apollo took the case to their father Zeus for resolution. And Hermes again pleaded his case. He said, I'm just a little baby. How could I have done this? But Zeus saw through it. Zeus knew what was happening, but he was so completely taken with the hubris and the cleverness of his young son. So he commanded the two siblings that they must work out this issue between themselves. And sensing that he must obey his father, as recompense, Hermes offers the lyre to Apollo, who had heard him playing the instrument and was so captivated by the sound. So Apollo accepted the gift graciously and returned the stolen cattle, and the two brothers reconciled their differences. So from this famous story as the stealer of Apollo's cattle emerges the expression of what we call the Puer Eternus, the eternal child. And this phrase was originally originated with Ovid, the Greek poet, in his description of the child gods of the Greek pantheon. And Carl Jung adopted this archetype that psychologically describes an older man whose emotional life has remained at the adolescent level. And this was further popularized by the psychologist Dan Kiley in his 1983 book, The Peter Pan Syndrome, Men Who Have Never Grown Up. So along with the refusal to grow up and remain a child, an individual will also express or often express glibness, glossing over the truth, and even lying to obfuscate the truth with a total disregard of the consequences of his actions. So as an expression of the Puer Eternus, Mercury reveals where we feel young and describes how we like to play and our sense of humor. There's a natural curiosity. And in its shadow, the Puer is prone to glibness, as I said, of response and expression. Thinking and opinion is often reductionist. There's dishonesty and obfuscation of the truth in order to retain one's own established self-identity, self-identification. There's no evidence of conscience displayed, and little regard for the consequences of action or speech. Aspects and phase relationships between Mercury and the moon correlate to the individual's relationship and quality of the communication between mother and child. So, and aspects of the sun and Saturn indicates the child's experience with the father. And these astrological conditions reflect the way an individual will mature and develop their own emotional and intellectual security. determining how they will handle new situations and their crises and the nature and direction of their personal growth. In the exchange of his lyre as recompense for stealing his cattle, Apollo gifts Hermes with divination, which leads him to discover astronomy, astrology, and mathematics. And Hermes uses these abilities to order and enumerate the phenomenon of the natural world and the alphabet and creates alphabet and numbers. Hermes also receives through divination the art of magic, which grants him invisibility and powers. And the story goes that Zeus was so impressed and taken with pride at the clever craftiness and ingenuity of his newborn son that he appoints him to be the messenger of the gods and bestows upon him a magical golden rod to facilitate his work. So there's some historical controversy between the rod given by Zeus and what we now know as the Caduceus. Some accounts suggest that the oldest known imagery dates back to the early Mesopotamian origin and a Sumerian god whose symbol was a staff with two snakes intertwined around it, dating back to 4000 BC. And by some accounts, the Caduceus evolved from a rod entwined with a single snake, which was carried by Asclepius, who was the father of modern medicine. So there's some discussion as to whether they were the same or they were different. And there are some who actually say that the medical staff that we know as the Caduceus was not the magical rod carried by Mercury, but there doesn't seem to be anything definitive about it. But the Caduceus shows up again as the staff carried by Hermes Trismegistus in Greco-Roman mythology. And Hermes Trismegistus may be a representation of a syncretic combination, a cultural combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, because both Hermes and Thoth were gods of writing. And Hermes, the Greek god of interpretive communication, was combined with Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, to become the patron of astrology and alchemy. And in addition, both gods were psychopomps, guiding souls to the afterlife. So there are a number of instances of where Hermes used this magical rod through the mythology. He used it to help Heracles, or Hercules, as the Romans knew him, to catch Cerberus, the dogs that guarded the gates of hell, by putting them to sleep. And he used his rod as, I have trouble pronouncing this one, Agafontes, to aid Priam, the King Priam, after the Trojan War, to lull the guards to sleep. Priam's son Hector had been slain by Achilles, who was his mortal enemy, and Achilles had dragged his body around the battlefield, just celebrating the victory. And Priam was so distraught of what had happened to his son that he was on his way to rescue him, and Hermes just showed up to aid him at the bidding of the gods in another form. He didn't come as Mercury, and he helped Priam sneak into Achilles' camp again by making the guards go to sleep so that he could walk past them. He also put the giant Argos to sleep so that he could slay him. And he saved Odysseus from Circe in their return from the Trojan Wars back to Greece by giving him the magical herb Molly that made him immune to her enchantments. And we'll see later that this theme of magic reemerges later in the myths of the Hellenistic period of Hermes, as it was synthesized with the Egyptian god of Hermes Trismegistus. So the mythos of the stolen cattle also illuminates the archetypal sibling relationship between Hermes and Apollo. Both brothers, the older brother Apollo being jealous of the attention given to the newest member of the family, and the younger brother jealous of the position, power, privilege, and possessions of the elder brother. They both exhibit jealousy. And challenging aspects from Chiron, Saturn, and Pluto to Mercury can often indicate these kinds of sibling rivalries that are more than just your normal stuff between brothers and sisters, and can indicate more serious family disconnects. Michael Clark tells us that part of the Hermes Mercury archetype in the third house is to experience lying and cheating and gossiping and teasing amongst the siblings in our experience to be recognized and be separate. Hermes' mythology is most significant in the stories of his role as Psychopomp, the guide of souls between worlds. As the messenger of the gods, Hermes was the only god who could enter and leave the underworld without harm. And the best known account of this is his well-known rescue of Persephone after her abduction by Hades. But he also aided Orpheus, the legendary musician, poet, and prophet in Greek religion and myth, in the retrieval of his wife Eurydice, who had also descended into the underworld. And he also had guided the slain warriors of the Trojan War into Hades. By the late 1st century BCE, the center of Greek learning and knowledge had migrated to the city of Alexandria. The city Alexander the Great built in his own name and on the fertile delta of the Nile River. Here, under the tutelage of Claudius Ptolemy, writer, musician, astronomer, geographer, and astrologer and poet, the foundations of metaphysics that would flow through the occult world for the next 2,000 years emerged as alchemy, astrology, Kabbalah, and later as tarot. Alchemy refers to the process of the transmutation of base metals, generally lead, into noble ones, particularly gold, and the creator of an elixir of immortality, the creation of panaceas able to cure any disease, and the development of alkahest, and universal solvement. The perfection of the human body and soul was thought to permit a result from alchemical magnum opus, and in the Hellenistic and Western traditions, the achievement of gnosis or knowledge. This was insights, the Greek word which meant the insights into man's real nature as divine. It was during this period that the magician alchemist appears as the mythical or actual Hermes Trismegistus. Again, it's unknown whether this was an actual figure or this was a figure of mythology. But there were emerald tablets which were discovered, which held what we call the Hermetic principles, which are attributed to this individual, this character. The Puer Aeternus, the Latin for eternal child, revealed in Hermes as the liar and the thief, now evolves into the Senex, the Latin for the old person, the sage, the wise old man. And these are both archetypes described by Carl Jung. So we see as the mythology unfolds, the evolution from child to sage. And this is very much correlates to the progression of Mercury in our lives and how the planet works natally through progressions and transits. Obviously, always depending on sign, house, aspect. And we can't eliminate that it also depends on the consciousness that's brought to the chart. So what is this astrological alchemical function that Hermes and Mercury correlates in the natal chart? It's according to Jeff Green, the nature of Mercury in Gemini is connected to the natural zodiac and the mutable cross. 3rd house Gemini, 6th house Virgo, 9th house Sagittarius, and 12th house Pisces. There is a natural conflict between left brain, Mercury Gemini, rational inductive reasoning, essentially our opinions and subjective ideas regarding reality, and right brain deductive reasoning, our broader understanding and beliefs regarding the nature of reality, Jupiter Sagittarius. There's also a conflict between our individual practical considerations, Mercury Virgo, and larger transpersonal universal truths, Neptune Pisces. So we know that Hermes was able to travel between the 3 worlds, the upper world of divinity, the middle world, which is our consensus time and space reality, and the lower world, the subconscious. It's important to remember that Hermes can navigate these 3 realms without harm. And the same facility is available to each of us through the understanding of the placement of Mercury by sign, house, and aspect in the natal chart. Mercury's planetary nodes also reveal the pathway from past to future, anchored in the present by natal Mercury. Through the light cast on the shadows on the subconscious and the recognition and acknowledgement of those shadows, the conscious and unconscious can be synthesized into a more holistic self. And this alchemical transformation facilitates the opening of channels that receive life force. Mercury's close proximity to the sun, he's never more than 28 degrees away, correlates to his role as messenger of the gods. As he shuttles back and forth, he collects and disseminates solar energy. When conscious and subconscious are fully integrated, this solar force that was called prana by the Hindus, chi by the Chinese, can be received and absorbed more readily and flow, which is a function of the moon, more readily through the four bodies, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical, without internal psychic or mental obstruction. Because Mercury is never more than 28 degrees from the sun, the only aspect that is possible is the conjunction and the new and balsamic phases. There are two types of Sun-Mercury conjunctions. The inferior conjunction, when Mercury is retrograde and closest to the Earth, and the superior conjunction, when Mercury is direct, opposing the Earth on the far side of the sun. The Sun-Mercury cycle begins at the inferior conjunction. At the retrospective Mercury phase, the seed thoughts for the cycles are generated and released. At the superior conjunction, these seed thoughts take shape as ideas and mental connections that shape the unfolding and waning cycle of this planetary pair. Those natives born with Sun conjunct Mercury are expressive as speakers and writers. There is a strong need to have a voice in the world in one form or another. The new phase relationship with the sun correlates to Mercury as the morning star, moving ahead of the sun. This is an individual with an active, initiative mind, always on the lookout for something new to consider, explore, and learn about. In this waxing portion of the cycle, Michael Meyer described this placement as Mercury Prometheus, after the god who stole fire from the Zeus and took an active agenda for the benefit, welfare, and advancement of man. This Mercury is forward-looking, anticipating the future, thinking ahead. Meyer writes, born anew from the cycle just closing, the mercurial faculties of the mind and communication have been impressed with a new quality of will, purpose, and energy, symbolized by the zodiacal and house positions of the inferior conjunction which inaugurated the new cycle. Jason Holley correlates this phase to the Gemini expression of the planet, yang, male, and air. As Mercury meets with Sun in superior conjunction, the Epimethean profile of Mercury emerges, correlating to Mercury's affinity and rulership of Virgo, yin, inward directed and earthbound. There is more reflection and thought, looking backwards in retrospect during the retrograde portion. It has been said that if Mercury rises before the sun, you think first and then act. If the sun rises before Mercury, you speak first and then seek justification for your actions. The moon and superior planets, Mars through Pluto, which reside outside of the moon's orbit, connect with Mercury across a full spectrum of aspect and phase. Aspects to the moon refer to how emotions are integrated with thoughts and vocal expression. Trines, sextiles, and quintiles will facilitate being able to express how one is feeling emotionally. Conjunctions, squares, oppositions, sesquiquadrates, and quincunxes will refer to places where this natural expression is being blocked or distorted in some way. This can be a conflict between head and heart. Often, this is an indication of deeper karma complex that is being exposed for healing. Mercury and Venus also travel in a narrowly defined space, never more than 76 degrees apart, only allowing for the conjunction, semi-sextile, semi-square, and sextile. A Mercury-Venus blend can bring a beautiful singing or speaking voice or a beautiful manner of expression via the written word, either as prose or poetically. In consort with Venus, our thoughts, ideas, and opinions are innately connected to our values, one necessarily follows the other. In essence, we are what we think, and the priorities that we set for ourselves are a direct result of our cognitive construction of the world around us. The facilitating aspects will make our intentions clear. Our values and priorities will define the context of what and how we are communicating. There will be a tendency to speak to what has real meaning for us individually, and our words will set our priorities clearly. The challenging aspects can potentially spin our words and thoughts in negative directions, feeling jealous or holding on to vain self-identification. We may even lash out verbally rather than be able to objectively disagree with someone else. Even with challenging aspects, Mars and Mercury will enliven any conversation with a spark of wit and intelligence. The mind is quick and very curious. Mercury and Mars natives are prone to impulsive and sometimes hurtful speech. Harsh words can create conflict, and this planetary combo is ready for any verbal rumble contest. In general, there is a self-centeredness about the native, often in their head, and they're often in their head. Mercury-Jupiter natives frequently possess largesse of jovial good nature and playfulness. They are generally broad-minded within their own intellectual boundaries, and they can be a bottomless pit of knowledge, always seeking out new thoughts and ideas. They can be as funny and as fun to be with as they are wordy and long-winded, and they can have expansive vocabularies. In their shadow, evangelism lurks, and they often are in the role of a crusader. Mercury and Saturn correlate to the elder teacher, whose authoritative speech maintains the status quo. Speech and voice can have a minimalist quality, yet filled with importance. The mind is focused and goal-oriented. In their shadow, a Mercury-Saturn native will often display self-expression that is repressed or suppressed. There can be a tendency to limit one's imagination and fantasy, or anything seeming to be too irrational in any way. There may be insecurity about how smart or skillful someone might be, but they are still willing to work hard to learn and make it happen. These individuals take their time and think things through. Their thinking is most conventional, though, and there is a resistance to anything unconventional, not tried and true. Mercury and Uranus amplifies the channel between lower mind and higher mind. This can be a signature for genius. Individuals can be prone to idealistic thinking as well as practical inspiration. Sleep patterns can be disturbed because of the almost incessant internal chatter. Its best expression is an insightful, illuminated mind, futuristic inspired thinking, and originality. And depending on the aspects to the rest of the chart, especially the placements of Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, there can be an information overload. Thoughts and ideas come faster than they can be assimilated. Sentences aren't finished. There's a general state of too much information. To others, the mental gymnastics might also seem too far out, impractical, and unworkable. Mercury-Neptune natives can be blessed with the most imaginative minds filled with romantic, even surreal imagery. They can be highly intuitive and perceptive, even psychic. They can be extremely compassionate and empathetic. These are the poets, storytellers, songwriters, and visionaries. In its shadow, all the complexes that display as mental imbalance, delusion, deception, and dyslexia. Mercury-Pluto can bring the most penetrating and insightful ability to the mind. These natives are able to relentlessly dive into a subject to its core or totally ignore that which it has perceived as simply superficial. In its shadow, these natives can be mentally controlling and intellectually overwhelming. They are great investigators and researchers. In its shadow, it holds obsessions and deep-seated phobias that distort their perception and color their ideas and opinions. Jason Hawley says that Hermes tended to show up in stories at points where the action needed to take a turn, or where the will of the gods needed to clearly be expressed to humans. And we can interpret that to mean that in situations where we really need to hear our higher self, we need to hear what our guardian angels are trying to tell us, is when he steps in. The space in which Mercury operates is a liminal space. His presence opens the threshold between what is not any longer and what is not yet. This vortex is saturated with potentiality, even as it seems to not contain anything that seems actual. Wherever Mercury is, wherever he resides in a chart, is a threshold. It is a space of mental construction and intention. In this role, Mercury acts as the incubator of who we are becoming. When Gemini thoughts polarize the Sagittarian beliefs, and we are synthesized with the meaning and values correlating to Venus Aphrodite, the resulting priorities being handed off to Mars for execution, thoughts become words, words become actions, and actions become deeds. I have a quote here, two quotes. Mahatma Gandhi said that your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. And there's a Rosicrucian proverb which says that words have wings. And I'm so sorry, Linda, that I haven't even filled the hour. Probably spoke a little bit too fast, but I'll open up the floor to questions or comments or anything that anybody would like to add, so that we can make good use of the time.
Yes, okay, Daniel, not a problem. Any questions from anybody or comments? Please go ahead.
Wonderful, thank you, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you. A question? Just okay, that's good.
Give us a moment to think.
I just wanted to tell you, and I'm sure I'll probably have a question when it comes up, but I just wanted to say real quickly that what you mentioned about Saturn and Chiron contacts to Mercury, spot on. Mercury conjunct Saturn and Chiron, so definitely spot on. And it takes me a while to formulate my thoughts and just putting it out there, it's like,
Well, I will own up to the Mercury Chiron. I have Mercury exactly trining my Chiron, but Mercury is also in a T-square with Neptune and the Moon. And my family has had many disconnects, many family issues that were, I would categorize as quite dysfunctional. And I attribute it to that exact exact trine to Chiron. I'm still alive, and my older brother, who's my sole sibling, is also still alive. So, I think that things will work out differently than they were when we were younger, but I have experienced that directly.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you bringing that up, because it's kind of a thought that I had in my mind, but I'd never heard anybody say that before. Now I have the trine, a pretty tight trine to Neptune, and Neptune is conjunct my third house south node. So that, and then Mercury is also in Pisces, so that theme is definitely repeated in the dysfunctionality. Exactly.
That's interesting when you talk about the nodes, how your Mercury touches. My Mercury is in Capricorn, so I have a slower process for how my thinking mind is and communicating. It is trine my south node in Virgo, but I also have Uranus at 8 degrees Libra, which and my Mercury is at near the midheaven. And my Mercury's at 14 Capricorn. So I think it influences kind of these sudden, sometimes I think someone's finished when they're talking to me, and I enter in at the wrong moment and they're not finished. So it's kind of interesting, how that plays out. My daughter also has the Mercury conjunct Jupiter in Scorpio, and she's still young, but that combo in Scorpio is square her Saturn, pretty exact at 20. Her Saturn is at 23 Leo in the first house. And she has told me, and she's only 10 and a half, but she's told me that she doesn't want to grow up. So I kind of think about the Peter Pan complex, and I wonder about that. And I don't know how that'll play out for her exactly, but it's kind of interesting to, to hear that, but also see such a strong, combination with Mercury and Jupiter square her Saturn. So it's that would be interesting to dive into.
Well, as a child, she's still allowed to be a child. It's interesting because Jung wrote that, we never lose that pure eternus. What happens is that we synthesize it. It becomes our inner child. So that as we age and as we mature, we don't lose that innocence, that connection to the world, that everything can be new and exciting rather than getting all crystallized and grumpy and old. So it's not a bad thing. It's only when we hang on to it, and never grow up. Just
That's good insight. Yeah.
Just to comment on Mercury in Scorpio, I have two family members who are both Mercury and Scorpios, and they're not always very forthcoming with what they're thinking or feeling, but when they are ticked off, you know it.
Yeah, I've seen that even at her young age. If she's ticked off, though she has a delay in her emotions, it's interesting. But she'll growl.
How old is she?
She's 10 and a half.
Uh-huh.
So she's still growing up. So, but it's interesting because when her Mercury is influenced, she has like out of the blue just wanted to start writing a book, and she'd steal all the paper from my printer and staple it together and start writing a book.
Good.
So it's interesting to observe how that Mercury is impacted by what's in transit or how it's being aspected.
What house is her Mercury in?
Her Mercury is in the fourth house in Scorpio at 23 or 24, and her Jupiter is at 23, 24. So they're, together, and they're exactly square her Saturn in the first house in Leo. So, plus she has Sun and Venus and Mars also in Scorpio at the 1 degree.
Is Scorpio a sign that runs through your family?
Yeah, there's a lot of Scorpio. I have Jupiter in Scorpio, so my Jupiter is her Sun, Mars, Venus is on my Jupiter.
When she was born, you
had
transit to your Jupiter. Huh?
Yeah. So yes, so it's very interesting.
Yeah.
There is a lot of Scorpio throughout the charts of my family. Yeah, in different ways.
Well, our families are the primordial pool.
Indeed. You can learn a lot. Very good sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel, how do you make sense of these myths? Like of what value are they?
I think they have great value, Linda, because they reflect our archetypal nature, and we can learn a lot from them. When a client comes in for a reading, I find it's often very useful, especially in terms of explaining how the asteroids are working in their chart, to just tell them the story of the mythology. And in almost every case, they take something away from it that is very meaningful to them. There's a part of it that sticks. And so there is something in the mythology that reaches us at a deeper subconscious level that's not necessarily rational. It reaches us in a different way, and I think it's important because we are all connected at that level. Archetypically, it's not an accident that all these planets, excuse me, carry mythological themes and even, mythological names.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, it's interesting that these methodologies were created during the patriarchy, towards the beginning of the patriarchy, and throughout it. And I guess it still reflects us on a deeper level. But then what about coming out of that patriarchy and reconnecting with our matriarchal roots? And what role would these myths then play in that?
Well, I think it's interesting because as this shift is occurring, we are discovering new bodies in space that really reflect the shift from patriarchy to matriarchy. Certainly, a lot of the information that has come out about Lilith and Eris, and even going back to the 70s, when the asteroids were actually mapped and we had an ephemeris for them, really opened up that whole side. The truth of it is that the Greco-Roman cultures, the Greek and Roman societies, really are our roots in a lot of ways. We as Americans trace our heritage and our history back to Europe, but the Europeans trace their lineage and their history back to the classical age. Some of us, have an affinity, perhaps with Sumer or Egypt, only because, we've become aware of, through the stories of those cultures, we've become aware of how that our own lives somehow reflect that. But it's an ongoing process. We're all, moving, and it's a cycle. It's 26,000 year cycle. And so we're coming around to a point where we're headed, back towards where it was, 15,000 years ago, where our direction has changed and our perspective has changed. But it's kind of like when you go out for a hike. You're walking down the trail and you climb a mountain, and when you get to the top of that mountain, all of a sudden you have a different perspective. So we've been in a valley, we've been in the forest, or however you want to, what analogy you want to use. And we're seeing, we were seeing, certain landscape, but the landscape is now changing as we're moving forward. And it's all about the adjustment or non-adjustment to that landscape. Some people, I live at 7,000 feet, and a lot of people come here and they're in trouble because they can't breathe. And I don't know that that's a perfect analogy, but I think it reflects that each of us has a different experience, but as a whole, our collective experience is moving in a single direction.
Thank you. Yeah, I just received a vision there of you sitting up there in Mount Olympus. Sorry. Yes, so the question is, does Mercury rule Virgo, or does Chiron, or both Mercury and Chiron?
That's a great question. I have actually been moving to the position that I believe that Chiron is the actual ruler of Virgo. Chiron's association with holistic healing, mentoring, his ability to teach, and I think that that's a very Virgo archetype. It's really hard to say. I think it's good to kind of come at it from both perspectives because, it's a broader understanding. I don't think that we need to necessarily isolate everything to a single idea or a single meaning. We need to have a holistic perspective. A hologram, each side of a hologram projects a different image, but yet all those different images are a greater whole. And I think it's good to look at it from every direction. Right?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That's very interesting. Thanks so much. Any other questions?
So after you read about Mercury and Jupiter, I really had to hold back from just expounding on everything because I have Mercury, Jupiter, trine, Mercury and Virgo ruling my Gemini North node, Jupiter obviously ruling my South node. So I was going to let you have it, and then I held back. You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. It was beautiful.
I had another question as far as Mercury and the hands, and because that part of Mercury is not really talked about. I mean, it's kind of mentioned, and then we always focus on the mind. So, could you speak a little bit to that? Because it seems to apply as far as Gemini and Virgo.
Well, I think the best example again goes back to the myth of when he's made the lyre. He had very he was a craftsman. He was able to just pick up a shell and a few odds and ends that he found in the vicinity, and he made a musical instrument. I think that speaks to the craftsmanship and handiwork, the work of an artisan. I'm sure that there are other examples, but that's the one that comes to mind.
I've got a
Yes.
good one. I have really big hands. They're, not like outrageous on my arms, but I have really big hands. Mercury trine Jupiter and Mercury and Virgo.
Mhm.
That's a simple one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Same here. I have Jupiter actually in Gemini, and then Mercury is square Jupiter, and I do have large hands for a female. And in comparison, my husband, as far as we both bowl, and my grip is too large for him. Even though my ball is lighter than his, but my grip is too large, and he can't hold on to it. And then, now that doesn't really make sense. You're looking at a woman, really? Your grip is larger than that? So, yeah.
Well,
I have the hardest time too.
my story would be that my Mercury is in Cancer in my 11th house, and it has that trine to Chiron. And I love to build things and work with tools, but I kind of say that how am I going to draw blood with this task? I'm often wounding myself with either my knife or my saw or my hammer. It's a common occurrence, all too common. Susan's always ready with the band-aids and the ointment and I attribute that to that 11th house, somehow trauma and Chiron and wounding and moon and blood. So yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. That definitely set some things off for me, because I'm always injuring myself. I cut myself twice, 2 weeks in a row. About 6, 7 months ago, on a can, and it was on my bowling hand. So, and I had to bowl with this cut. Still did it. My husband did it too, probably about 2 weeks before I did. So yeah, and I'm always I love to build, try to build stuff and working on stuff. And I'm sitting here right now working on some bracelets.
I've learned to build creatively because I can't wound myself. No blood.
So my honey Dennis has Mercury in the 7th, 0 Gemini, squaring Mars in the 3rd, 29 Aquarius, and squaring Pluto in the 9th, 26 Leo, opposite Saturn in the 1st, 28 Scorpio. And his hands for the last 2 years have been going through this terrible kind of transition. He's a heavy equipment mechanic, and he's had cracks, horrible itching, and then his hands will just, his skin will just crack apart down to the meat.
Ooh.
And it's terrible.
Yeah, those are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful. And the best thing that he's found is some Eucerin lotion, and actually, this might sound horrible, but urinating on his hands in the shower is what he does in order to seal them up. And that's what's worked so far. But now he's having something exploding on the backs of his hands, some other kind of something going on.
Does he stay hydrated a lot? Does he stay hydrated?
Yeah, he drinks water continually all day long. He's virtually vegan. We would call that flexitarian, I think, because, you know, Christmas time and holidays and such, we will eat other things. But we juice. He's got like motor oil coming out of the back of his hands right now. It's weird. Yeah. Anyway, that's what's going on with him.
It is weird.
Yeah. Sorry about that, you guys.
No problem. It's fine. Daniel, yes, I've just mentioned that it's a good idea to look at the nodes of Mercury in one's chart as well. South node of Mercury and the north node of Mercury, to see where we're coming from, the Mercury archetype that we're coming from, and how we're evolving it. So that's a good thing to look at as well.
Yeah, I think it can be as illuminating as the, you know, house sign and aspects of natal Mercury itself.
Absolutely.
Because it shows you how it's working across time.
Yeah, my north node of Mercury is in Aquarius, and I'm very happy about that. Yeah. There was something else. Oh gosh, memory. I can't remember what it was. Oh dear. I suppose that's a mercurial archetype as well.
Especially when it's retrograde. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Can you speak a little to the retrograde while Linda's trying to recover that thought?
Well, you know, the retrogrades are all, you know, going to be about the rewords, and with Mercury, it's definitely rethinking, reconsidering, reworking, revisiting. But you know, there's a tendency to think that somebody who has Mercury retrograde natally, that there's something wrong with their thinking, and they can actually be more intelligent than a lot of other people in their third grade class, because they have that objectivity mentally and intellectually. They're able to actually separate separate themselves from their thinking in a way, to be able to be more centered and come to terms with it. And it's the same thing that happens to each of us who have Mercury direct. When it goes retrograde, we have an opportunity to revisit some of the, you know, what we're thinking about, what ideas we have, because we are our ideas. You know, we are so much what we think. And you know, are we thinking something that's real, or are we thinking something that's imagined? You know, have we picked up some conditioning along the way, and we're holding on to this thought? And when Mercury goes retrograde, I think it gets externalized, and through that external event, we get to see it up close and personal, and begin to understand that maybe it's you know, it's not working. But you know, the retrogrades are actually a very productive and positive event, because we need that withdrawal. We have to be able to withdraw periodically in order to regroup and you know, get all our ducks in a row, so to speak, and then be able to come back with a whole new sense of animation and you know, excitement.
Yes, Daniel, yes, I remembered my question. I also am finding this Mercury retrograde cycle very productive, especially in terms of quietening the mind. I feel it's important to align with a transcendental system. This is the Sagittarius polarity to Gemini. And for me, that's via natural laws and, you know, transcending that sort of babble of Gemini, and finding that peace and aligning with that peace. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, it's really a good point. You know, we pick up ideas and opinions, you know, from everywhere, from the people in our world, our family, our friends. We read the newspaper, we listen to a broadcast, or watch a YouTube or something, and you know, all of a sudden we can be shown a whole new perspective. And you know, we are malleable. You know, we all have Neptune, we all have Pisces, we all have a 12th house. So we do absorb what we're exposed to, whether we realize it or not. And I think the retrograde cycle gives us an opportunity to kind of filter that out, to sort it out, and really determine, is this something I really believe, or is this something that I've picked up from somebody else? It's what they believe.
Yes, I think the Gemini archetype is so important for spiritual practice, to see things from another point of view, another perspective that can really boost your evolution, you know, by changing those very fixed structures of the mind, the way we see things, the way we think, changing that completely and allowing us to evolve. So I think that's really incredible.
Right. Well, Jeff Green, referenced that. We are, all have that mutable cross, and it's not just the polarity of Gemini and Sagittarius. It's also the quadrature from Virgo and Pisces. It's all active all the time, even if we don't realize it. That dynamic is always there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we have about 2 minutes. Any final comments or questions?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel.
No, thank you guys for listening and being here.
Okay, Daniel, are you happy to wind down now? Or?
Yep, I'm good. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much from all of us, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. This was great.
Namaste. See you all later.
Bye.